Agatha Raisin swept into the Castle WI Hall with the confidence of a woman determined to outshine absolutely everyone, even if only 3 of them were paying attention. The place was already alive with movement, women ferrying cake stands, the scrape of chairs, the clink of teaspoons against china. Somewhere near the back, someone laughed a little too loudly, which Agatha interpreted immediately as derision. She lifted her chin. If she could not impress them with charm, then sheer force of personality would have to do, as usual. Hodge, tucked in her arms like a furry badge of honor, flicked his tail with faint warning. She set him neatly onto her lap as she sat, smoothing her tailored jacket and giving a brisk smile to whoever happened to be watching. Several WI ladies exchanged knowing glances, but Agatha ignored them. Today was a cake-tasting afternoon, which ought to have been her element. Sweetness, competition, judgment, all things at which she excelled. The comforting smell of sponge, buttercream, and Doris's over-enthusiastic lemon glaze hovered in the air. Agatha breathed it in with satisfaction. At least here, she thought, she might regain some dignity after a week filled with small domestic disasters. But dignity is notoriously fragile in Castle. Hodge, traitorous creature that he was, stiffened suddenly on her lap. Without ceremony, he hopped down, tail raised in deliberate purpose. Agatha reached for him with a gasp, but he was already trotting across the polished wooden floor, weaving between chair legs with the brisk confidence of a creature who knew precisely what he wanted. Several women paused mid-conversation to observe his progress. Agatha froze, dread prickling. Hodge reached Doris Simpson, flustered, apron-crumpled, flour-dusted Doris, then sprang lightly onto her lap as if claiming rightful territory. A ripple went through the hall. Someone tittered. Another murmured, "Well, isn't that something?" Doris's cheeks turned the colour of a raspberry fool. She lifted her hands helplessly as Hodge curled contentedly, purring with the smug force of a creature who had just delivered the greatest possible insult to his owner. "I didn't do anything," Doris protested, flustered. "Honestly, Mrs. Raisin, he just, well, came over." Agatha stood slowly, each movement stiff with mortification. Several WI members watched her with the fascination of spectators at a minor domestic tragedy. She crossed her arms, wishing she could summon a thunderbolt to strike the entire room silent. Instead, she forced out, "He must have been confused. Cats do suffer from lapses in judgment." But the room wasn't done with her yet. Into the warm hum of chatter drifted a cool, smooth voice. "Or," it said with polished condescension, "cats gravitate toward the calmest, most grounded human in the room." Every head turned. Lydia Forbes entered as though the doorway were a stage and the WI hall her waiting audience. She was impossibly sleek, London chic wrapped in a beige cashmere coat, hair pinned with mathematical precision, smile poised somewhere between benevolence and superiority. Agatha disliked her immediately. Lydia moved through the hall with an air of serene authority, pausing to greet bewildered WI members and making them feel, Agatha suspected, faintly inadequate merely by existing. She finally stopped near Doris, observing the scene with mild amusement. "Fascinating," Lydia murmured. "Cats are excellent judges of energy." Several ladies turned toward Agatha and exchanged meaningful glances. Agatha's mortification ripened into a simmering fury. Lydia clapped her hands lightly. "Thank you all for welcoming me today. I'm delighted to give my talk on understanding your cat. I hope to dispel a few myths and perhaps help you interpret what your feline companions are truly trying to tell you." She smiled directly at Agatha. "They communicate far more than we realize." Agatha, unwilling to be outperformed by a woman who probably arranged her spice cupboard by alphabetical snobbery, leaned forward. "I'm perfectly aware of what my cat communicates," she declared. "He simply has moments of poor taste." Lydia's eyebrows arched with delicate pity. "Cats seldom misplace their affections. They are drawn to balanced households." The implication landed with the accuracy of a professional dart thrower. A ripple of quiet laughter slid through the hall. Someone coughed pointedly. Agatha's pride ignited. She signed her name on Lydia's consultation sheet the moment it was passed around, ignoring Charles Frayth's raised brow from across the room. "One private consultation," Agatha said firmly. "At once. I'd like a professional assessment of Hodge's temporary lapse." Doris tried to soothe matters by bustling about with cups and saucers, muttering about needing to tidy the kitchen before the scones cooled. Hodge accompanied her, hopping off her lap only to follow at her heels like a furry shadow. The sight deepened Agatha's humiliation, though she tried to maintain a valiant composure. The talk began. Lydia drifted through topics with polished ease. Feline body language, subtle cues, emotional projection. She made passing references to rural households being overstimulating environments, and suggested that cats sometimes choose safer emotional ground when household stress is high. Every so often her gaze flicked toward Agatha, who refused to look impressed. Under the surface humour of cake crumbs and cat observations, something else stirred, something subtle and unsettling. Lydia spoke, almost offhandedly, about instances where a cat's sudden change in loyalty had revealed hidden problems in the home. Cats notice tension, she said with a sly smile. They feel dishonesty. They can sense when someone is not quite what they seem. That comment landed strangely. The hall quieted. Even Doris paused mid-stack of saucers. Agatha frowned. She couldn't tell whether Lydia meant anything in particular, but the remark felt pointed. And while Agatha did not believe in mystical animal intuition, she felt a twist of annoyance that anyone might view her household as emotionally unstable, simply because she had a lively personality. Still, the room absorbed Lydia's every word. Women nodded, murmured, leaned closer. By the time Lydia concluded, half the WI members believed their cats might be miniature oracles of domestic insight. The applause, though polite, had a breathless edge. When the event finally wound down, Agatha seized the opportunity to reassert control. She strode to Doris in the kitchen corridor. "You mustn't let Hodge confuse you. He's fickle, easily distracted." "Oh, I know," Doris assured her earnestly. "It's just, well, he seems rather taken with me today." "Temporary nonsense," Agatha snapped. But when Hodge emerged from beneath the counter, rubbing himself affectionately against Doris's calves, Agatha felt something tighten in her chest. Not jealousy exactly, but a sharp sense of betrayal. She told herself it didn't matter. Cats were capricious, ridiculous creatures. She didn't need validation from one. And yet, walking home later, she could not shake Lydia's earlier remark. Cats gravitate toward the calmest, most grounded human in the room. Agatha replayed it again and again. Beneath her irritation lurked something unexpected and faintly ominous, a sense that this day, ridiculous as it was, had shifted something subtle beneath Castley's surface, something that had nothing, and yet somehow everything, to do with Hodge choosing Doris. Agatha's front door had barely clicked shut when Lydia Forbes glided past her like a well-dressed draft of judgment. The woman moved silently, hands clasped before her, as if entering a consultation suite rather than Agatha Raisin's decidedly lived-in cottage. It was the sort of walk that implied the house was already failing some unspoken inspection. "Charming," Lydia murmured, though her tone suggested the opposite. Her eyes travelled over the mantelpiece, the crowded bookshelf, and finally the crocheted armchair cover Doris had given Agatha. "Just until I find something nicer." Hodge, lounging on the rug with an air of comfortable superiority, lifted his head. Agatha forced a welcoming smile. "Shall we begin? Hodge is in excellent spirits today." Lydia drifted nearer, tilting her head at the room. "He must be remarkably resilient. Many cats struggle in overstimulated environments." Agatha blinked. "This is not overstimulated. This is cozy." Lydia made a soft, pitying sound. "Cluttered spaces reflect cluttered minds, Mrs. Raisin. Animals absorb that." The remark landed sharply. Agatha stiffened. "My mind is perfectly uncluttered." Hodge, in a rare betrayal of timing, chose that moment to get up, stretch luxuriously, and pad across the room, straight to Doris's old armchair cover. He circled once and curled into it with a satisfied huff. Lydia smiled. A small smile, but sharp as a pin. Fascinating. He gravitates toward calm textures. "Calm textures?" Agatha sputtered. "That's a borrowed blanket from Doris Simpson. It has no personality whatsoever." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Lydia replied, studying the fabric as though diagnosing it. "Cats respond to scent and to emotional imprint. Interesting that he associates the armchair with stability." Agatha felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "Are you implying I'm unstable?" Not at all, Lydia said sweetly. Only that cats often choose the more dependable human in their orbit. That's absurd, Agatha snapped. He goes to Doris because she smells of laundry powder and sponge cake. Anyone would. Lydia merely smiled again, the sort of smile that suggested she was privately awarding herself points. She moved around the room with infuriating grace, pausing at objects as though reading Agatha's life story through their dust patterns. This cottage has potential, Lydia observed, but cats do require emotional constancy. They don't respond well to volatility. Volatility? Agatha all but choked. I am not volatile. Lydia lifted one elegant brow. Of course. She made a note in her little leather book. Now, tell me about Hodge's sleeping habits. The consultation only deteriorated from there. Every innocuous question, what was Hodge's diet? Where did he nap? Did Agatha raise her voice at home? Was laced with insinuation. Lydia had a talent for disguising criticism as concern. By the 10th question, Agatha's teeth were clenched tight enough to powder walnuts. And then came the final blow. Given his recent behaviour, Lydia said lightly, Hodge's preference for Doris suggests he may find her the steadier companion. Cats sense traits we often overlook. Agatha stared at her. Steadier? Doris? She cries over dropped teacups. A sensitive soul, Lydia said, but grounded. Agatha inhaled sharply. Whereas I am, what, an unmoored piece of driftwood? Lydia's smile did not flicker. We all have our strengths. Agatha's reply was unprintable. The session limped to its conclusion. Lydia slipped a glossy bottle from her bag and placed it on the table with reverence. I recommend my bespoke herbal calming tonic, just 2 drops in his food daily. It does wonders for cats in emotionally vigorous households. Agatha picked up the bottle, squinted, and nearly dropped it when she saw the price printed discreetly on the label. £10 for something that smells like licorice foot balm? Absolutely not. It's very popular in London. Then take it back to London, Agatha snapped, thrusting the bottle into Lydia's hands, and take your insinuations with you. Lydia's expression remained maddeningly serene. As you wish. She gathered her things, drifting toward the door like a departing spirit of judgment. If you reconsider, I'm only a phone call away. I won't, Agatha said, shoving the door open. Cats rarely lie, Mrs. Raisin, Lydia murmured as she stepped out. Their loyalties tell us truths we sometimes need to hear. Agatha shut the door behind her with a force that rattled a picture frame. Hodge yawned. Word of Agatha's disastrous consultation spread through Carsley with the efficiency of a well-oiled gossip mill. Mrs. Bloxby arrived later that afternoon with a gentle knock and a plate of shortbread, her expression full of sympathetic concern. I've heard Lydia can be direct, she said delicately. Direct? Agatha snorted. She's a walking insult wrapped in beige cashmere. Mrs. Bloxby patted her arm. Some villagers have found her manner a little superior. That was putting it mildly. At the Red Lion, the landlord, Mr. Jessup, was far less diplomatic. She told me the pub cat is emotionally neglected. Emotionally neglected. The creature sleeps on my warm beer barrels and eats better than I do. At Mercester bus stop, Agatha overheard a heated exchange between Lydia and Neil Parker, the timid bank clerk. Neil's voice trembled as he muttered something about a private arrangement, and Lydia's not-so-subtle threats. Lydia stood perfectly composed, adjusting her coat, her voice low and icy. I'd be very careful, Neil, she said. Cats sense dishonesty, and I'm very good at interpreting signs. Neil blanched. When Lydia boarded the bus, he sagged onto the bench as though escaping a firing squad. Agatha approached him, but at the sight of her he bolted like a startled rabbit. The more Agatha heard, the more uneasy she became. Lydia seemed to know everyone's weaknesses. She had consulted not just about cats, but about personal anxieties, marital tensions, financial secrets. Her business was not merely feline behaviour. It was a quiet excavation of private lives, and Lydia wielded this knowledge with deliberate precision. As Agatha walked through the village, snippets of conversation drifted past her. She said my cat avoids me because I'm repressed. She told Mary Johnson she overshares with her pets. She claimed Mrs. Tyrrell's cat cries at night because of her unresolved childhood trauma. In every whisper, Lydia glowed like a polished menace. Hodge naturally continued to undermine Agatha's authority. When Doris visited to drop off a magazine, the cat bounded into her arms as if reuniting with royalty. Doris blushed. "Oh, don't be cross, Mrs. Raisin. He's just fond of me today." "He's being dramatic," Agatha muttered. But beneath the irritation simmered something sharper. Lydia had the unnerving ability to twist simple behavior into psychological diagnoses. And though Agatha refused to believe a word of it, she could not rid herself of the faint, uncomfortable feeling that the woman saw more than she should. Later that evening, Agatha sat alone in her cottage, sipping wine with unnecessary vigour. Hodge dozed on Doris's armchair cover again, purring like a tiny engine. The cottage felt unusually still. Every creak and sigh of the house seemed magnified. Lydia's voice drifted back to her. Cats gravitate toward the more dependable human. Cats notice tension. Cats don't lie. Agatha scowled at the empty room. "Absolute nonsense," she declared aloud. But the unease remained, stubborn as a stain. Lydia Forbes knew too much, far too much, and Agatha Raisin for once wasn't entirely sure what the woman intended to do with it. The trouble began with a cat carrier that refused to open. "Hold still, you beast," came Mrs. Jessop's strangled cry as she wrestled with a plastic latch in the church hall doorway. A ginger paw shot out through the bars, swiping at her hat brim with admirable accuracy. Several WI ladies paused mid-conversation to observe the struggle, their expressions a blend of pity and entertainment. It was, Agatha thought grimly, a fitting omen for an event titled Tea with Your Cat. The church hall buzzed with activity, the sort of bustling chaos that Carsley somehow considered organised. Doris Simpson commanded the kitchen like a general under fire, her apron already dusted with flour and her arms laden with teapots. The long tables were lined with mismatched cups and saucers borrowed from half the village. Some were chipped, some elegant, some clashing spectacularly with the tablecloths. A plate tower of scones wobbled dangerously as Doris swerved past. Agatha arrived with Hodge clamped resentfully in her arms. The moment she stepped inside, he let out a protest yowl that made 3 attendees jump. "Don't you dare embarrass me again," she muttered under her breath. Hodge naturally ignored her. The moment Agatha set him down, he trotted straight across the hall toward Doris as though fulfilling an appointment. He brushed against Doris's ankles, tail high and purring loudly. "Oh, you lovely boy," Doris cooed. "Agatha, he really does adore—" "He does not adore," Agatha snapped. "He merely assesses. He's gathering research." Doris blinked. "Research?" "Yes. On who feeds him crumbs." She gave a stiff nod and stalked away before Doris could reply. At the front of the hall, Lydia Forbes presided over the event with the serene authority of an empress condescending to visit a distant province. She held a delicate china cup between elegant fingers, the picture of composure. Women arranged themselves before her in undue awe, cats sitting in carriers beside them, or perched nervously under chairs. Agatha sat as far forward as possible, arms folded. She refused to let Lydia's presence dominate the morning. The woman had waltzed into Carsley dispensing judgment like raffle tickets, and Agatha fully intended to find a flaw in her polished armour. But her attention was diverted when Hodge padded over to Lydia's feet. Instead of greeting her, he sniffed at Lydia's teacup. His ears twitched back sharply. Then, with a quick recoil, he turned away and slunk straight back toward Doris, settling near a saucer on the floor. Agatha frowned. Odd, but chatter swelled around her, drowning out the peculiar moment. Teacups clinked, chairs scraped. Doris called for quiet as she carried out another tray. Lydia raised her voice slightly, continuing a story from her last consultation. "And in homes where emotional toxicity lingers," she said, "the cats will often—" Her words halted. It was subtle at first. A pause, a falter in her immaculate posture. Her hand tightened on her teacup, causing the china to rattle faintly against the saucer. Several women glanced at one another. Lydia drew a breath, but it came strangely thin, constricted. Agatha sat up straighter. "Lydia?" The colour drained from Lydia's face as though siphoned away. A sheen of sweat appeared along her brow. She lifted a trembling hand to her throat. "I beg your—" She staggered a half step, the chair behind her scraping loudly. Then pandemonium. A scream tore through the hall. Someone shouted for water. Cats hissed inside their carriers. Chairs toppled. Doris dropped an entire tray of scones, her hands flying to her mouth as Lydia collapsed sideways and hit the floor with a sickening finality. Agatha rose at once, pushing past startled WI members. "Give her air! Let me through! Move those chairs!" Lydia lay contorted on the wooden boards, gasping shallowly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Her teacup, overturned, dripped a pale ribbon of tea across the floorboards. "Call an ambulance!" Mrs. Bloxby cried, clutching her handbag in horror. "I've dialed!" someone shouted from the doorway. Agatha knelt, though she felt horribly unqualified. Lydia's breath rattled unevenly, her body trembling. Whatever was happening, it was happening fast. Too fast. Agatha looked toward the fallen cup, noticing how the liquid seemed to carry an odd herbal smell beneath the steam. Within minutes, paramedics burst into the hall, bringing order where panic had reigned. They worked swiftly, lifting Lydia with practiced care, but their exchanged glances carried the weight of grim experience. Before Agatha could even process the moment, the stretcher was wheeled away, the church hall echoing with shocked silence. Doris sagged onto a nearby chair, trembling. "I only served the tea," she whispered to no one in particular. "I didn't. She just collapsed." Agatha placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not your fault, Doris. It must have been a fainting spell, or a reaction." But even as she said it, doubt crept along her spine. Something in Lydia's eyes, in the way her hand tightened on the cup, had felt wrong. Hours later, Agatha sat at her kitchen table, staring at her cold tea. The phone rang. She knew, even before lifting the receiver, that it would be Bill Wong. "Agatha," Bill said, voice subdued, "I'm afraid I have news. Lydia Forbes didn't make it." Agatha exhaled softly. She had expected bad news, but not so abruptly. "What happened?" "The post-mortem gives preliminary signs of poisoning." Agatha sat up straight, pulse sharpening. "Poisoning? From the tea?" "Looks likely." Bill paused. "And she wasn't at home. She drank only 1 cup today." Agatha felt the cold weight of that sink in. "Doris made the tea." "Yes," Bill said gently. "Which means we have to look closely at everyone involved, but, well, the kitchen is our first stop." Agatha's heartbeat quickened in anger. "Doris wouldn't harm a fly, Bill." "I know she's your friend," he said, "but someone poisoned that cup. We have to ask questions." After he hung up, Agatha remained seated, staring at Hodge curled smugly on her sofa. Poison, murder, incarceracy, and Lydia, with all her secrets, her condescension, her unsettling knowledge, gone. Agatha's mind whipped back to the moment Hodge recoiled from Lydia's cup. He had sniffed, twitched, and refused to go near it again. Cats indeed noticed things. The village would not remain quiet for long. Already whispers would be forming in kitchens, post office queues, and over back fences. Doris Simpson, beloved WI stalwart, was in the firing line. Agatha rose with purpose. "Don't worry, Hodge. I won't let them pin this on Doris. Whatever happened today, we're getting to the bottom of it." Hodge blinked at her with slow, feline detachment. Outside, the village lane stretched ahead, quiet, unsuspecting, and simmering beneath the weight of a mystery that had only just begun. "Did you hear?" The question drifted through the village shop the next morning like cigarette smoke, thin, persistent, impossible to avoid. Agatha had barely stepped inside before she sensed it, that itch of collective curiosity that Carsley produced with the reliability of a ticking clock. Villagers stood in tight clusters between the tinned goods and the bread counter, their voices pitched low but not nearly low enough. Doris poured the tea. She handled every cup. And didn't she look put out when Lydia criticised her kitchen towel? It was all delivered in that maddening tone of false sympathy, the kind that pretended to pity while savouring every detail. When Doris herself appeared in the aisle, clutching a packet of digestives and looking small enough to fold into a biscuit tin, the whispers softened but did not stop. She offered Agatha a trembling smile. "I thought I'd better get out of the house. Sitting alone makes things worse." Agatha placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Ignore them. Half of Carsley would blame their own shadows if it meant feeling important." Doris attempted a laugh but failed. "They all saw me hand Lydia her cup. They must think, oh, I don't know what they think." Agatha did. She had seen the looks. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion, sympathy curdled by self-righteousness. Carsley's loyalty was fierce, but it could turn on a sixpence. Mrs. Bloxby, hovering near the greeting cards, approached with a distressed expression. "Doris, please don't listen to gossip. People say foolish things when they're frightened." Doris nodded shakily, but her eyes were already glossing with tears. It made Agatha furious, not at Doris, but at the village that could be so cruelly inconsistent. One minute they adored Doris Simpson, the next they circled like hens smelling fox. Agatha straightened. "Come on, we're leaving. You don't need to stand here being stared at like an exhibit." They left the shop together, heads high. Well, Agatha's was high. Doris's drooped like a wilting tulip. Even outdoors, the murmurs followed them. Bill Wong arrived at Agatha's cottage an hour later, wearing the tired look of a man who wished he didn't have to knock on this particular door. His notebook was already half open in his hand. "I'm sorry, Agatha," he murmured the moment she let him in. "Procedure. We have to speak to everyone involved." "Then speak," Agatha snapped, ushering him in. "But wipe your feet. Doris has suffered enough without muddy carpets." Doris was seated on the sofa, twisting a handkerchief until it resembled a tortured rope. Hodge, with a flair for poorly timed disloyalty, lay sprawled contentedly in her lap. His purring filled the room like a smug metronome. Bill's eyebrows lifted. "He does seem rather fond of her." Agatha bristled. "He's confused. He's been dramatic all week." Bill hid a smile and took a seat. "All right, Doris. I just need you to walk me through yesterday. Slowly, from when you arrived at the hall." Doris nodded, swallowing hard. "Well, I came early to set up the tea. The WI cupboard was a mess, so I borrowed extra cups from Mrs. Bloxby and a few from the church vestry. I made the scones at home." "Did anyone help you in the kitchen?" Bill asked. "No. Well, people came in and out. But the tea—" She shook her head quickly. "I poured every cup myself, one for each lady." "And Lydia's cup?" Bill asked gently. Doris's face tightened. "She changed it, at the last moment. I handed her a blue and white cup, but she pushed it back and said she couldn't bear a hairline crack in the glaze. I hadn't even noticed it. She picked another one off the tray herself." Bill stopped writing. "She chose her own cup?" "Yes, I thought it strange, but she could be particular. I didn't think anything of it. I swear I didn't." Agatha leaned forward. "Bill, she's telling the truth. Lydia probably would have refused a cup if it wasn't polished to laboratory standards." Bill nodded, but Agatha could see him folding the detail carefully into his thoughts. Lydia swapping cups, Lydia sensitive to flaws, Lydia selecting her own death vessel, unknowingly or otherwise. Before Agatha could challenge the direction of his thinking, Hodge shifted in Doris's lap and pressed his head against her arm, purring even louder. His green eyes blinked in serene devotion. Bill observed this with infuriating amusement. "Well, between you and me, if cats are good judges of character, he seems to have chosen his favourite." Agatha nearly exploded. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Bill, he's a cat, not a magistrate." But Hodge only purred louder, stretching out a paw to gently knead Doris's cardigan. The gesture was maddeningly affectionate. The phrase that had begun circulating, "the cat that preferred Doris," hung in the air between them, invisible but unmistakable. Agatha could practically hear it being whispered already across Carsley's hedgerows. Bill closed his notebook with a soft snap. "We're not accusing anyone yet, but Doris, it may be best if you step back from WI duties until things settle." Doris's face crumpled. But I've always helped at events." "It's just a precaution," Bill said. "You know how villagers talk. We don't want things getting worse." Agatha stood abruptly. "Absolutely not. You are not sidelining Doris to appease a pack of gossiping hens." Bill sighed. "Agatha, no. If the WI wants to bar her, they'll have to bar me too." "Agatha, you're not even on the committee." "They can bar me preemptively." Bill blinked. "That isn't how committees work." "Well, they'll find out how it works when I'm done with them." Bill cast a pleading look at Doris. "Please don't let her start a civil war." But Doris only shook her head in despair, tears collecting in her lashes. "Maybe it's better if I don't go for a while. I only upset people." "You upset no one," Agatha said fiercely. "Except me, occasionally, by being too modest." Bill stood, tucking his notebook away. "We'll talk again soon. For now, just stay available." The moment he left, Agatha shut the door with theatrical force. Doris sagged onto the sofa. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." Hodge curled more firmly into her lap. The traitor. Agatha sat beside her, less gently than she intended. "Listen to me. You didn't poison anyone. Lydia drank tea every day from cups far dodgier than yours. Something else happened. Something deliberate," Doris sniffled. "But everyone thinks—" "I don't care what everyone thinks." Agatha folded her arms. "I'm going to prove it." The declaration hung in the room with the weight of a vow. Agatha meant every word. No one bullied Doris Simpson, no one except Agatha herself, and that only out of affection, exasperation, and habit. As Doris pulled herself together and left for home, Agatha remained seated, frowning into the quiet. Hodge hopped onto the armchair cover, eyeing her with mild feline suspicion. "Don't look at me like that," Agatha muttered. "You've been no help whatsoever." But her mind wasn't on the cat. It was drifting back to the church hall, replaying the moment Lydia's hand tightened on her teacup. The faint herbal smell, the sudden pallor, and earlier, Hodge's strange reaction to the cup, sniffing, twitching, retreating, and one other detail, Lydia swapping cups at the last second. Why? The crack had been barely visible. Agatha hadn't even noticed it. Yet Lydia had reacted as though the flaw offended her soul. Was it vanity, fastidiousness, or something deeper? Agatha uncrossed her arms slowly. Two oddities. Hodge recoiling from one cup, Lydia rejecting another. Both felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, but wrong in the way of small details that later proved to be massive clues. She stood abruptly. "Oh, we are not letting this rest," she told Hodge. "If the village wants a culprit, they'll have to look elsewhere." Hodge yawned. "You can yawn all you like," she snapped, grabbing her coat. "I'm getting answers." And with that, Agatha Raisin stormed out into Castle, determined, furious, and entirely prepared to dismantle every whispered accusation until Doris's name was clear. Charles Fraith had been in Agatha's kitchen for approximately 40 seconds before he realized resistance was useless. "No," he said firmly, crossing his arms. "Absolutely not. I refuse to be dragged into another one of your crusades. The last time you involved me, I ended up dangling from a barn loft while you shouted strategic advice." Agatha shoved a folder toward him. "That was hardly dangling, and this is important." "It always is," he murmured, though he reached for the folder anyway. Hodge leapt onto the table, inspecting Charles with the critical stare of a tax auditor. Then, as if bestowing approval upon Agatha's mission, he plopped onto the folder itself. Charles sighed. "Look at him," Agatha huffed. "Useless animal." "He seems rather fond of you today." "He's judging me," Agatha muttered. "Now get your coat. We're going to Mercester." "You're not even offering me lunch first?" "You may buy yourself lunch if we solve a murder." Charles groaned, but 5 minutes later he was in her passenger seat. Their first stop was the Mercester Pet and Garden Emporium, a cheerful storefront bedecked with paw print stickers and hand-painted signs. Inside, the smell of hay, dried treats, and slightly damp sawdust mingled with the chirping of caged finches. Behind the counter, the shop owner, Mr. Calloway, a balding man with a kindly expression, perked up as they approached. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, terrible business, terrible." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I suppose you're here about her?" Agatha nodded briskly. "We understand Lydia Forbes supplied you with her tonics." Calloway shuddered. "Tonics, yes. Or what she called tonics. I call them daylight robbery." He disappeared beneath the counter and returned with a small glass bottle containing a murky amber liquid. £35 for this," Charles choked. 35. "Imported herbs," Calloway said with a grimace. She claimed they were sustainable and spiritually aligned with feline chakras. "Feline what?" "Don't ask," Agatha snapped. "Did they work?" Calloway shrugged. "Hard to tell. Most people kept buying them because Lydia suggested their cats would suffer emotionally otherwise. She had a way of making people confess things, personal things, before she'd even looked at their pets. I swear half the village told her secrets they wouldn't tell their priests." Agatha and Charles exchanged a look. "She hinted she knew where bodies were buried," Calloway added. "Not literally, mind, but you know. Threats wrapped in velvet." His expression darkened. "She liked leverage." Agatha scribbled this down. Leverage. She had suspected as much. As they left, Hodge, who had elected to accompany them today, sniffed at the row of Lydia's remaining bottles on the shelf. His whiskers twitched sharply. Then he backed away with flattened ears, giving a tiny, offended hiss. Agatha crouched. "What's that about, you wretched creature? You adore the smell of bin bags." But Hodge refused to go near the bottles again. Charles raised an eyebrow. Perhaps even he has standards. Agatha ignored him, but her mind tightened around the observation like a knot. The next stop was the veterinary surgery, where the fluorescent lights hummed and posters of smiling cats lined the walls. The vet, Dr. Felix Randall, a thin, bespectacled man with the posture of someone who had spent too much time coaxing medications into the mouths of unwilling animals, ushered them into his office. "I warned her," he said immediately. "Warned her?" Agatha asked. "That her compounds were too potent. Herbal doesn't mean harmless, you know." He pushed up his glasses. "Some herbs can interact badly with blood pressure medication, antidepressants, even certain teas." Agatha blinked. "You're saying her concoctions could seriously harm someone?" Dr. Randall nodded with weary conviction. "Absolutely. Lydia used ingredients without proper dilution. When I told her, she waved me off, said her clients were too desperate to be cautious. She believed she was changing lives." "By poisoning them?" Charles muttered. "Not intentionally, but recklessness is a kind of negligence." He paused. "If someone consumed a higher concentration by accident or design, it could do real harm." Agatha exchanged a slow glance with Charles. So Lydia's tonics weren't just eccentric nonsense, they were potentially dangerous, and Lydia had kept bottles of them everywhere. "Did she have enemies?" Agatha asked. "Mrs. Raisin," Dr. Randall sighed. "Lydia Forbes could make enemies in an empty room." This, Agatha thought grimly, was becoming clear. In the outskirts of Mercester, they visited a pretty stone cottage where a tearful housewife answered the door. Her mascara traced faint streaks beneath her eyes. I just can't talk about her anymore," she said miserably. Agatha softened her tone. "We only need to know what she did." The woman wrung her hands. "She said my cat was depressed because I withheld emotional intimacy." "Emotional intimacy? It's a Persian. It doesn't even like being touched." "Did you buy the tonics?" Agatha asked. The woman nodded. "Crates of them. I couldn't afford it anymore, so I told her I needed to stop. Then she said she might mention things." "Mention what?" The woman swallowed. "That I drink too much. That I sometimes nap in the afternoons instead of doing the ironing. That I borrowed money from my sister without telling my husband. Things she had no business knowing." Tears spilled over. She watched everything, not just the cat. Charles put a gentle hand on her arm. "You're not alone. Others have similar stories." The woman blinked in relief. "Really?" She made me feel like I was the only terrible person in the village. "Oh, trust me," Agatha said. "The village has vastly more terrible people." They left her marginally comforted, and Agatha more certain than ever that Lydia hadn't simply observed cats. She had mined secrets. The Red Lion pub was next, warm with the smell of ale and lunchtime stew. Mr. Jessup, the landlord, leaned over the counter as Agatha explained their purpose. "If you're looking into Lydia," he growled, "I'll save you time. That woman was poison well before anyone drank it." "Why?" Agatha asked. "She stuck her nose in my accounts, saw a letter from the bank lying about, said the pub was showing signs of strain. Then she asked whether the pub cat was anxious because I worked too hard. Too hard." He thumped the bar. "She was hinting she knew my finances, that she could, well, suggest things to the village." "What things?" Charles asked. Jessup scowled. "That I was running the place into the ground. The pub's reputation would crumble. She didn't say the words, but she didn't need to. She was a master of insinuation." Agatha could practically see the pattern now. Lydia invading homes, extracting secrets and using them like currency. If Lydia hadn't been murdered, Agatha thought grimly, someone would eventually have shoved her into a pond. Their final visit of the day was to Neil Parker, the jittery bank clerk who had visibly panicked at the bus stop. Neil lived alone in a semi-detached house with lopsided curtains and a garden full of neglected rose bushes. He opened the door only after 5 minutes of the chain rattling. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," he said faintly, "and Mr. Fraith, I assumed you were the meter man." "We're not," Agatha said briskly. "We're here about Lydia." Neil paled. I told the police, We're not police," Agatha cut in. "We're researchers." "Into murder?" Neil squeaked. Yes, Charles said helpfully. Neil sagged against the doorframe. I knew she'd ruin me. Even dead she'll ruin me. Agatha stepped closer. Neil, what did she hold over you? He hesitated for several agonizing seconds, then whispered, I may have extended credit to myself. Small amounts, temporary. I always put it back. His hands twisted miserably. She saw the statements on my desk. She said she understood my financial anxiety and would help me manage it for a consultancy fee. How much? Agatha asked. £50 the first time, then more. His cheeks reddened. She hinted she'd mention it to my supervisor otherwise. Charles let out a low whistle. Agatha said softly, Did you ever think about harming her? The blood drained from Neil's face entirely. No, God no. I just wanted her to leave me alone. Agatha studied him. Neil was nervous, ineffectual, and visibly terrified. Not the type to poison someone in a crowded hall, but definitely a man Lydia had tormented. As they left, Hodge, who had been sitting quietly in Agatha's arms, twisted suddenly and sniffed the air. He stared at Neil's doorway, ears twitching, then pressed his face into Agatha's coat as if to hide. Odd. Very odd. By late afternoon, Agatha and Charles were back on Castley's High Street, exhausted but electrified. Everywhere we've gone, Charles said, we've found people she manipulated. She weaponized secrets, Agatha replied, and half her clients had reason to despise her. They paused outside Agatha's gate. Hodge wriggled free, trotting ahead with purposeful steps. When Doris appeared at the fence to wave at them, Hodge immediately bounded over, twining around her legs with delighted affection. Agatha threw up her hands. Oh, for heaven's sake, even today? Doris laughed shyly. He's just fond of me. But Agatha wasn't laughing. Not this time. Not when she replayed Hodge's earlier reactions in her head. He recoiled from Lydia's cup. He recoiled from Lydia's tonics. He recoiled at Neil's door. But Doris's kitchen, Doris's hands, Doris's clothes, not once. The pattern was forming, one Agatha had no name for yet, but one she could not ignore. Charles, she murmured, I don't think Hodge is choosing favourites. No? I think, she said slowly, he's reacting to a smell. A smell linked to Lydia's death? Exactly. And as the evening light softened across the village roofs, Agatha Raisin felt the investigation shift beneath her feet, subtle, decisive, and leading somewhere far darker than she had imagined. Agatha had barely finished her first cup of morning coffee when the latest piece of gossip landed on her doorstep, quite literally, shoved under the mat by someone too cowardly to knock. It was a torn scrap of notepaper bearing 8 scrawled words. Ask Alec Turner about Lydia. He hated her. Agatha stared at the message, then snatched her coat from its hook. Charles, she bellowed across the cottage, we're going out. Charles emerged from the sitting room, having just settled into an armchair with the Telegraph. Must we? Yes. There's a man on the outskirts of the village who hates cats, hates Lydia, and hates being questioned. In other words, a delightful morning outing. Charles dropped his newspaper with theatrical despair. Couldn't you have warned me before I put on clean trousers? Come along, Agatha said briskly. We're going to see Alec Turner. Hodge, sprawled on the radiator, opened one eye and assessed the situation. The moment Agatha reached for his carrier harness, he narrowed both eyes in a firm, unmistakable refusal. Oh no, Agatha said. You're coming. You may sniff something useful. Alec Turner's small holding lay at the far edge of the village, where tidy hedgerows gave way to rambling fences, sagging sheds, and a faint smell of silage. The path leading to the farmhouse resembled a mud obstacle course. Agatha stepped in one puddle, grimaced, and immediately declared, This is barbaric. Charles delicately picked his way behind her, trousers already speckled with mud. Heavens, Agatha, couldn't this have waited until dry weather? Agatha shot him a glare. Murder waits for no weather. The yard erupted suddenly with hostile clucking as a flock of suspicious chickens swarmed around their feet. Charles yelped and leapt sideways. They've formed a union, he cried, a militant one. Oh, do grow up, Agatha muttered, batting a hen away. Before Charles could recover, a massive dog, more muscle than fur, bounded from behind a shed, barking an alarm that rattled the windows. Charles froze. Oh no, he whispered. Oh, absolutely not. The The dog halted a few feet away, hackles raised, saliva dripping with enthusiasm. Hodge, perched on Agatha's shoulder, let out a horrified hiss and buried his face in her coat. A voice boomed from the doorway of the farmhouse. "What the hell do you want?" Alec Turner emerged, a broad-shouldered man in stained overalls, beard like a defiant hedge, eyes narrowed to slits of irritation. Agatha lifted her chin. "Mr. Turner, we need a word." "I don't need one with you," he growled. Charles raised a tentative hand. "Perhaps two, small ones." Alec glared. The dog took a threatening step forward. Agatha shoved Charles behind her. "We won't take long. This is regarding Lydia Forbes." "Then you can get off my land," Alec snapped. Agatha folded her arms. "We have reliable information that you threatened her." His jaw clenched. "I said she'd regret meddling, and she did, but I didn't kill her." "Oh, how convenient," Charles murmured. Alec stabbed a finger in their direction. "Get off my property." But Agatha held her ground with the stubbornness of a stone monument. "Before we leave, perhaps you'd like to explain your dramatic exit from her WI talk," Agatha said. Alec gave a harsh snort. "That woman lectured me about responsible pet ownership, like she knew a damn thing about farming, said I kept unethical traps, in front of everyone." "You do keep traps?" Agatha asked sharply. "Not anymore," Alec muttered. "But I didn't want her reporting me." "What kind of traps?" Charles asked nervously, eyeing the dog. Alec scowled. "Badgers." Agatha blinked. "Badgers?" "Yes. Nasty things dig holes under my sheds, but you need a license for removal, and I—" He stopped himself. "You didn't have one," Agatha finished. He growled, defeated. "I got rid of the traps the night before her talk, smashed them to pieces, didn't want trouble with the authorities." Charles tilting his head. "Seems a bit drastic for a man who claims not to care." Alec sighed heavily. "Look, Lydia wasn't wrong about the traps, but she threatened to report me, and I panicked, all right? I left her talk before tea was poured. Half the WI saw me go." Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Convenient alibi." "It's the truth," Alec said hotly. "Ask anyone. I was halfway down the lane before your lot even broke out the sandwiches." The dog barked in emphatic agreement. Agatha sniffed. "Still doesn't explain your hostility." Alec leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Because Lydia thought she could bully every person in this village. She'd cornered me twice already. She read my dog's emotions and said he suffered trauma from my harsh tone. Then she told me I'd better pay her for training sessions before she spoke to the council." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Extortion through pet psychotherapy. Lovely." "Look," Alec growled, "I hated her. Everyone knows that. But hate doesn't make me a murderer." Agatha studied him. Alec Turner was many things, surly, secretive, proud, but he did not strike her as subtle. Violence, perhaps. But poisoning in a crowded hall? That required a different sort of mind. She walked past him toward the barn. "I'll just have a look around." "The hell you will," Alec thundered. But Agatha was already 3 strides ahead, Charles close behind and silently praying the dog misunderstood trespassing laws. Inside the barn, Agatha methodically inspected workbenches and crates. No traces of suspicious substances. No vials. No herbs. No hidden shelves. What she did spot was a pile of smashed metal, twisted iron bars and springs. "The traps?" Charles asked. Alec nodded grudgingly from the doorway. "All gone. I panicked when she threatened me. I'm not losing my land over bloody badgers." Agatha frowned. "So the night before Lydia's talk you destroyed the evidence of your guilt." Alec stiffened. "It wasn't guilt. It was fear." "And fear," Agatha murmured, "can turn a man toward desperate acts." Charles cleared his throat nervously. "Agatha, the dog is edging slightly closer." "Good." She turned sharply. "One last question, Alec. If you didn't kill Lydia, why refuse to speak to us?" Alec's expression briefly cracked, just for an instant, revealing not anger but exhaustion. "Because I'm sick of people assuming the worst," he muttered. "Lydia did that. Treated everyone like they were hiding filth under the carpets. Maybe some were, but not me." Agatha hesitated. For once, Alec Turner looked less like a brute and more like a man cornered by his own reputation. But before she could respond, Hodge, who'd been sulking inside the carrier, began fussing loudly. Agatha opened the latch to shush him. Hodge bolted. Not toward the barn. Not toward Agatha. Not toward safety. He shot across the yard, through a patch of nettles, and straight toward the stone cottage next door. Alec shouted. Charles yelled, "Hodge, Hodge, no!" But cats seldom heed the pleas of men named Charles. Agatha sprinted after him, skirt flapping like a sail. She rounded the hedge and skidded to a halt. There, framed in the warm, welcoming doorway of the small cottage, stood Doris Simpson, polishing a delicate china cup. Flour dusted her sleeves. The soft smell of baking drifted into the air. "Oh," Doris cried, "I didn't expect company. Hodge, you silly boy, come here." Hodge launched himself into Doris's arms and immediately began purring. Agatha caught up, panting. Alec appeared moments later, glaring at the intrusion like a troll guarding a bridge. Charles staggered behind, gasping, "I despise cardio." As Agatha looked from Alec's grim, mud-streaked yard to Doris's warm kitchen, gleaming counters, orderly shelves, cups flickering with gentle reflected light, she felt a strange twist inside her. Hodge had fled that place without hesitation and run toward Doris. Again. But this time the contrast was blindingly stark. Alec's world, harsh, tense, fearful. Doris's world, warm, steady, domestic. Agatha felt something settle in her chest. Not an answer, but an instinct. Alec Turner might have many faults, but murder, poisoning, calculated timing with teacups and swapped saucers, she wasn't convinced. As they walked back across the muddy yard, Alec called after them, voice gruff but firm, "I didn't kill her, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha didn't turn around. "Perhaps not," she said, "but someone with far sharper motives did." Charles tugged at his sleeve. "So this leads nowhere." "No," Agatha said slowly. "It leads somewhere else." "Where?" "To the part of Lydia's life we still haven't understood. The part that connects secrets and fear and maybe something she noticed about the wrong person." Charles exhaled. Cryptic, encouraging. Agatha stopped walking. The wind rustled the hedges. Hodge pawed at her ankle. "Alec and Lydia clashed about traps," she murmured. "A simple grievance. Obvious. Too obvious." "Meaning?" Charles asked. "Meaning Alec may be a brute," Agatha said, "but our killer is clever, careful, someone who understands timing, access, and distraction." Charles frowned. "Someone like—" But she didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she looked back once more at Doris's peaceful cottage, her mind circling the uneven puzzle pieces. Alec cracked traps. Lydia cracked nerves. But the murder? The murder required cracking something else entirely. And Agatha had the growing suspicion that she'd missed one crucial connection, one that would lead her, very soon, into far darker territory. "Agatha, I'm telling you now," Charles said as they approached Lydia Forbes's rented cottage. "If we get arrested for breaking and entering, I am refusing to share a cell with you. You snore." "I do not snore," Agatha said, marching up the path with determined elegance. "And we are not breaking and entering. We are assisting the landlord with administrative matters." "You told him we were cataloguing her crockery." "It worked, didn't it?" "Only because he's 90 and deaf in one ear." Agatha ignored him and rapped smartly on the cottage door. After several seconds, the landlord appeared, Mr. Pembury, stooped and gentle-eyed, wearing a cardigan so worn it looked like a historical document. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," he said, squinting. "And your friend?" "Associate," Charles muttered. "We won't be long," Agatha assured him. "Just a quick look at her belongings to help you organize what should be kept and what should be returned to the family." Mr. Pembury nodded vaguely. "Terrible business, this. Terrible. Keys are in the pot by the door. Don't touch her teapot, though. Odd little thing. Doesn't sit straight." Agatha seized the keys and ushered Charles inside before Mr. Pembury could remember to mistrust them. Lydia's cottage felt eerily preserved, as if she might return at any moment to scold someone for breathing too loudly. The interior was meticulous, almost obsessively neat. Cushions aligned precisely, books arranged by colour, surfaces gleaming with a cold orderliness that suggested Lydia valued control far above comfort. Charles gave a low whistle. "It's like being inside a brochure titled How to Intimidate Guests." "Stop talking and start guarding," Agatha said, already rummaging through the front-room drawers with the enthusiasm of a terrier. "Agatha, we said we'd be discreet." "You said that," she corrected. "I said we're finding the truth." Charles positioned himself near the window, peeking nervously through a gap in the curtains. "Fine. Just hurry. And don't touch anything that looks expensive." "That includes everything she owned," Agatha replied, yanking open a drawer. Inside lay a row of folders, labelled with neat handwriting. Parker, Neil Jessup, T, Pubby, Bloxby, Vicarage Turner, Alex Simpson, Doris. Agatha felt her stomach jolt. "Charles, look at this." He darted over. My word, she had files on half the village. Agatha slid out the first folder. Inside were pages of notes in Lydia's tidy script. Beneath headings such as feline behaviour, household dynamics and emotional energies, sentences veered wildly into personal realms. "Neil Parker shows signs of anxiety. Confessed financial strain," Agatha read aloud. "He didn't confess," Charles said. She extracted. Next file, Jessup. "Pubcat restless. Suspect domestic disharmony. Landlord hiding something. Possible financial mismanagement." Charles winced. She would have made an astonishingly effective blackmailer. The vicarage file was more shocking still. Notes about private arguments, budget oversights, Mrs. Bloxby's gentle frustrations. Agatha felt a flicker of indignation on her friend's behalf. Then she opened Doris's file. It was thin, barely a handful of pages. Anxious fussing masks a sharp, cautious mind, possibly underestimated, maybe useful. Agatha bristled. Useful? Useful for what? Folding napkins? Why analyse Doris at all? Charles frowned thoughtfully. Interesting that this file is so short. Lydia pried into everyone else's lives with gusto. Agatha tucked the folder into her growing list of mysteries. "Right," she said, standing. "Bedrooms next." "Agatha, no, this is a boundary violation. Agatha." She ignored Charles and strode into the hallway. Lydia's bedroom was just as polished as the sitting room. White duvet smoothed to perfection, decorative pillows arranged like soldiers awaiting inspection, no dust, no clutter. And yet, something was off. Agatha scanned the room slowly. A wardrobe too tightly closed, a desk too clean, a dresser drawer slightly misaligned. She tugged on it. Locked. "Oh ho," Agatha murmured. "A locked drawer in a dead woman's room. Classic." "Agatha," Charles hissed, "we can't pick locks." "Of course we can." She pulled a hairpin from her handbag. "Hold this." "Oh, heavens," Charles moaned. Agatha knelt and began tinkering. Lydia, had she been alive, would have chastised her posture. Within 30 seconds, the lock clicked open. "Ha!" Agatha declared triumphantly. "Piece of cake, and look at this." A small wooden box sat inside the drawer. Charles leaned in. "Not jewellery, surely?" "No," Agatha said softly. "Cups." Inside were 3 delicate china teacups and matching saucers. 2 were flawless. The third... Agatha held it up to the light. A hairline crack traced its surface like a faint silver scar. "This is it," Agatha breathed. "The cracked cup Doris mentioned, the one Lydia refused to use." Charles blinked. "But if that's the cup Lydia rejected at the WI, why is it here? It should be in Doris's kitchen cupboard." Agatha stared at the cup, cold understanding crawling up her spine. "Someone," she whispered, "took the cup from the hall, brought it here, and replaced it with another." Charles sucked in a breath, meaning the killer had access to Lydia's cottage, and to the WI kitchen. Agatha nodded. Her heart drummed steadily. Someone who knew Lydia well enough to enter her cottage without raising alarm. Someone aware of her obsessive standards about crockery. She set the cracked cup down, turning her attention to the bottles sitting behind the wooden box. Lydia's herbal tonics, 4 of them, 3 full, labels pristine, and 1 half-empty bottle, its label stained as though touched by damp hands. Agatha unscrewed the cap and sniffed. The same bitter, medicinal aroma that had wafted from Lydia's teacup in the hall filled her nose. "That's it," she said quietly. "That smell. I knew I recognized something. This is what Hodge recoiled from." Charles peered at the bottle. So the poison came from Lydia's own tonic. "Or someone used the tonic to disguise the poison," Agatha replied. "If Lydia took these everywhere, the scent alone wouldn't have alarmed her." Agatha carefully placed the bottle back. "This is deliberate," she said. "The swapped cup, the tainted tonic, The return of the cracked china to Lydia's drawer. Someone was covering their tracks. Charles exhaled. This is no impulsive murder. It's calculated. Agatha closed the drawer slowly. And personal. Footsteps creaked outside. Charles froze. Agatha! Someone's coming. Agatha grabbed the box, shoved it back, slammed the drawer shut, and leapt to her feet. Charles darted to the doorway, eyes wide. The footsteps paused outside the bedroom. Agatha held her breath. The landlord's quavering voice drifted in. "Are you two all right in there? Only the kettle's boiled." "Lovely," Agatha screeched, pitching her voice far too high. "Just admiring the, carpet." Charles slapped his forehead. Agatha bolted into the hallway, pushing Charles ahead like a sacrificial shield. Mr. Pembury blinked, utterly unbothered. "Did you find everything you needed?" he asked kindly. "Oh, absolutely," Agatha said, patting his arm. "We'll write up a full inventory." "Yes," Charles muttered, "including the murder weapon." Agatha pinched him hard. Mr. Pembury shuffled ahead to lead them toward the door, humming an old hymn. Agatha cast one last glance over her shoulder. A pristine room, a locked drawer, a cracked cup, a half-used bottle of tonic, and somewhere, someone clever enough to place each item exactly where it did, or did not, belong. As they stepped out into the afternoon light, Charles sagged against the gate. "Agatha, remind me never to accompany you into any building where crime has occurred, or may occur, or could theoretically occur." "Oh, stop whining. You were marvellous backup." I hid behind a curtain. Strategically. Hodge, whom Charles had insisted on carrying for safety, wriggled loose and trotted toward the hedge, pausing only to give Lydia's front door a cautious sniff. His ears flattened. Then he scurried back like a creature avoiding a haunted house. Agatha watched him thoughtfully. "He's reacting to something in that cottage." "Probably Lydia's perfume," Charles said. "No," Agatha murmured. "Something bitter, something sharp, something that was in the cup she drank from." She took a step down the path, her mind racing. "Charles," she said slowly, "think about it. The killer returned the cracked cup to Lydia's cottage after the murder. Why? Why take that risk? To confuse the investigation? Or to remove evidence from Doris's kitchen?" Agatha said. Charles's expression twisted. "You think someone is framing her?" "Yes." Agatha clenched her fists. "Every step leads back to a single intention. Make it look like Doris had opportunity and access." "But Doris didn't," Charles insisted. "That woman is barely capable of scolding a burnt scone." "And yet," Agatha muttered, "her name is on everyone's lips." She looked down at Hodge, who blinked up at her, innocent and unhelpful. "That cracked cup," she whispered. "It's the linchpin. Once we understand why it mattered, we'll understand everything." She turned abruptly. "Come on, Charles, we're nowhere near finished." Charles followed resignedly. "Where are we going now?" "To find out who, other than Doris, handled the WI crockery before the event." Charles groaned. "Agatha, no one wants to talk about crockery." "Oh, they will," she said. "By the time I'm done, Carsley will wish it never owned a tea set." As they walked back toward the village, Agatha felt it. That shift, that tightening of threads, the unmistakable sense that she was brushing at the edge of something vast, deliberate, and dangerous. Someone had played the WIT like a stage production. Someone who understood Lydia Forbes. Someone who understood Doris Simpson. Someone who understood fear and how to use it. And Agatha Raisin, irritation burning into determination, was ready to kick down every door in Carsley until she found them. Doris Simpson had never been late returning from the village shop. Her routines were so precise that Agatha sometimes suspected she could set her watch by them. But on this particular morning, as Doris made her way up the quiet lane with Hodge trotting officiously beside her, there was nothing to suggest that anything in the village would erupt into panic. Nothing at all, until she unlocked her front door. The moment the latch clicked, Doris froze. A strange metallic hiss brushed against her ears. At first she thought it was just the kettle she'd forgotten to switch off the night before, but the sound was wrong. Too steady, too deliberate. Then the smell hit her. Gas. Thick, sharp, oily in the back of the throat. Doris stumbled backward with a strangled cry. Her foot caught the edge of the step, her ankle twisted, and she collapsed heavily onto the gravel path. Hodge shot past her in a streak of panicked fur, yowling as though the house itself was snarling at him. "Help!" Doris gasped. "Oh, please, someone help!" Her neighbour, Mrs. Ardley, happened to be watering her roses. She dropped the watering can at once and rushed over, shouting for her husband. Within moments, a crowd gathered, drawn by fear and curiosity, Carsley's two favourite pastimes. Doris trembled violently as she clutched her ankle. The gas smelled stronger now, even out here. Someone yelled for the fire brigade. Another shouted for everyone to stand back. Mrs. Ardley wrapped her arm tightly around Doris's shaking shoulders. Hodge darted in frantic circles, screaming at anyone who approached the door. The fire brigade arrived in minutes, though to the panicked crowd it felt like half an hour. Two helmeted men stepped inside the cottage and emerged moments later, grim-faced. "The hob was on," one said. "Turned fully on. No flame." Doris shook her head wildly. No, I always check. I always double-check. I haven't used it to cook today. I don't even like cooking." She burst into tears. Mrs. Ardley patted her back helplessly. The whispers began almost immediately. Good heavens, someone could have been killed. She must have left it on by accident. But she said she hadn't used it. Maybe she's confused. Or maybe, a voice murmured darkly, someone did it on purpose. That afternoon, by the time Agatha reached Doris's cottage, every window had been flung open. The house, normally warm and inviting, felt like a hollow shell desperately trying to breathe. She found Doris propped in an armchair, her ankle bandaged, her face pale and blotchy. Hodge sat faithfully at her feet, eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway as though guarding against an unseen foe. "Oh, you poor thing," Agatha breathed, dropping her handbag on the floor and kneeling beside her. "Whoever did this wants throttling." Doris sniffed. "The fireman said it was lucky Hodge bolted. If I'd gone inside, if I'd lit a match..." Agatha gripped her hand. "Don't think about that." "I didn't leave the hob on," Doris whispered fiercely. "You know I didn't." "I know," Agatha said at once. "And yet," Doris swallowed, "some people have been saying, well, that it's convenient timing." Agatha stiffened. "What people?" Doris looked away as tears threatened again. "That maybe I staged it. To look like a victim." She wiped her eyes. "Because of what happened to Lydia." "Oh, that is vile," Agatha snapped, standing abruptly. "They ought to be ashamed." But even as she spoke, she felt a cold knot forming low in her stomach. This was not a simple accident. Someone cunning, had entered this cottage, turned the hob on and left, to frighten Doris, possibly to kill her, or to silence her. Hodge paced restlessly between the armchair and the doorway, stopping every few seconds to stare into the kitchen with an accusatory meow. "He's been doing that all morning," Doris said shakily. "He refuses to let me go near the stove. It's like he's checking it for me." Agatha watched him, uneasy. That small creature, so often dramatic and self-important, had reacted to something very real, something dangerous. Agatha straightened. "Doris, tell me everything. Start from when you left the house this morning." Doris closed her eyes. "I went to the shop. Hodge followed. I was gone 20 minutes at most. When I returned, the door was locked just as I left it. But when I opened it..." She shuddered. "The smell was instant." "Did anyone know you'd gone out?" Agatha asked. "Well, most people saw me walking up the lane, and Mrs. Ardley waved to me just before I left." Doris hesitated. "And Mrs. Jessup walked past too, but I can't imagine." Agatha's mind churned. Someone had watched for their moment, someone who needed silence. "A witness," Agatha murmured, "or a liability." "What?" Doris asked. Agatha shook her head. "Never mind. Did you hear anyone near the cottage before you left? Anyone hanging about?" "No," Doris swallowed. Everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Bill Wong arrived shortly after Agatha, carrying the weary expression of a man who had begun to dread ringing certain doorbells. "Agatha," he said with a nod before turning to Doris, "how's the ankle?" "Painful," Doris whispered. Bill glanced toward the open windows. The fire brigade confirmed the gas hob was deliberately left on. He crouched slightly. "Doris, I need you to think carefully. Are you absolutely sure you didn't use the hob this morning?" "I swear it," Doris said fervently. "On anything you like." Agatha folded her arms. "Bill, someone entered this house. Doris is the target." "That is one possibility," Bill said cautiously. Well, what's the other? Agatha snapped. Bill hesitated. Sometimes people forget they've turned knobs. Not Doris, Agatha said firmly. The woman checks her locks 12 times before bed and irons curtains for relaxation. She didn't forget. Bill sighed. I'm not ruling anything out, but there are oddities here. Lydia's toxicology has come back. Agatha's pulse lifted. And? Traces of a plant-derived compound. Something similar to digitalis, but not quite. A concentrated herbal extract. He paused. We found the same compound in one of Lydia's tonics. Agatha exchanged a grim nod with herself. Then the poison didn't come from Dorothy's kitchen. Probably not, Bill agreed. But, he flipped open his notebook. Remember that cracked cup you mentioned? Forensics found no trace of poison on it. Agatha blinked. No trace? None at all? None, but one of the other cups from the W.I. Hall did show residue of the compound, one that was on the tray at the same time. Agatha felt the hairs on her arms rise. So the cups were swapped. Bill nodded. Either before the tea was served or during the chaos. That means, Agatha whispered, the murderer tampered with the crockery not once but twice, before Lydia drank and after she died. Bill closed his notebook. Which means they were confident, calm, comfortable handling things unnoticed. Agatha turned sharply toward Doris, who shrank slightly under the scrutiny, not of suspicion, but of fear. Doris, Agatha said gently, you told Bill earlier that you saw Lydia swap cups. Did you see anyone else handling the tray? Anyone brushing past it? Anyone returning to the kitchen for a moment? Doris blinked rapidly. It was such chaos. People everywhere. I can't remember clearly. There were hands and plates and, oh, I don't know. Her distress overwhelmed her. She buried her face in her hands. Hodge immediately climbed onto her lap, meowing furiously at Bill as if accusing him personally. Agatha placed a hand on Doris's shoulder. Don't force it, but someone thinks you might remember more than you realize. Bill looked troubled, meaning the attempted incident might not have been random. Agatha glared at him. It wasn't an incident. It was attempted murder. Agatha, no, Bill. Someone broke into Doris's cottage, turned on her hob, risked blowing her sky high. Bill pressed his lips together. We're taking it seriously. But until I know more, you're floundering, Agatha finished. So let me help. Bill looked both pained and resigned. Fine. But no interfering with witnesses, no tampering with evidence, and no interrogating half the county. Agatha gave him a tight smile. Of course not. Bill sighed. That smile means the opposite. He stood to leave, giving Doris's unbandaged hand a gentle squeeze. We'll post officers to keep an eye on the lane tonight, just in case. The instant his car pulled away, Agatha turned to Hodge, who was still glaring at the kitchen doorway. He knows something, she murmured. Look at him. Hodge continued pacing, every few steps pausing to inspect the knobs, then returning to Doris as if counting heads. Cats can smell things we can't, Agatha continued. He reacted to Lydia's tonic, to her cottage, to Neil Parker's doorway, and now... She looked toward the kitchen. Whatever was turned on here, whatever scent lingered, it's tied to the same source, Doris sniffed. Who would want to hurt me? Someone who believes you saw something, Agatha said softly, but I didn't. You saw something without realizing it, a detail, a hand, a movement, something so ordinary it didn't register at the time. Agatha inhaled slowly. The murderer is afraid of you, Doris. That speaks volumes. Doris's eyes widened. Oh, Mrs. Raisin, I don't want anyone afraid of me. Agatha straightened her shoulders. Then let me handle the fear for you. Hodge rubbed against her ankle as though in agreement. Agatha gave the small kitchen one last long look. Someone had been inside this house. Someone patient. Someone sure of themselves. Someone who believed Doris Simpson was the only obstacle between them and getting away with murder. And that, Agatha thought grimly, made Doris the most important person in Castley. Agatha Raisin strode into the Sparrowfield Church Hall as though she were directing a West End production, not a memorial tea for a woman half the village despised. The trestle tables had been dragged out exactly as they had been on the day Lydia Forbes collapsed. Mismatched cups, saucers in precarious stacks, a great industrial urn steaming ominously in the corner. Mrs. Bloxby fluttered anxiously after her. Agatha, are you quite certain this is wise? People are still rattled. Perfect, Agatha said briskly. Rattled people reveal things. Bill did not agree lightly, Mrs. Bloxby persisted. Oh, he'll recover from the shock of agreeing with me. Eventually. Bill Wong stood near the urn with the resigned air of a man bracing for a minor explosion. Agatha, he murmured, this reconstruction had better serve a purpose. It will, she said, lowering her voice. We're not here to mourn Lydia. We're here to observe behaviour. Bill sighed. I knew you'd say that. Agatha ignored him. Her eyes were everywhere, assessing the room, the cups, the chairs, the flow of natural movement. She had arrived half an hour early, marking the bottoms of certain cups with discrete coloured dots, green for those originally belonging to the hall, blue for those Doris had brought from home, red for the cups Agatha suspected someone had quietly swapped. Now, all she needed was the cast. Villagers trickled in one by one. Mrs. Jessup with a solemn nod, Mr. Calloway from the pet shop holding his hat as though at a funeral, Neil Parker, pale and twitchy, slipping into a corner like a startled moth. The vicar's wife hovered near the tea-table, wringing her hands. Doris arrived last, limping but determined, her ankle bandaged and her expression pinched with worry. Hodge padded protectively at her heels, tail twitching with proprietorial importance. "Doris, darling," Agatha said, giving her a one-armed embrace, "just do exactly as you did the day Lydia died." "I don't remember what I did," Doris whispered. "Yes, you do," Agatha said firmly. "Your body will remember. Trust that." Doris swallowed and nodded. Hodge leapt onto a chair, surveyed the room like a military commander, then hopped down and began patrolling under the tables. Mrs. Bloxby cleared her throat and called the gathering to order. "Thank you for coming. We're here to honour Lydia Forbes's memory and—" "Oh, do stop," Agatha interrupted quietly but firmly. "We all know why we're here." Bill shot her a warning look. Agatha smiled innocently. "To support the investigation, of course." Tea preparations began. Villagers drifted into their familiar formations, the vicar's wife by the crockery, the WI ladies near the scones, Mr. Jessup pretending not to hover for second helpings. Doris moved to the stack of cups with hesitant hands. Agatha watched closely. "Just choose as you did before," Agatha murmured. Doris reached automatically for a small, delicate cup with a painted rim, the same style Lydia had rejected for its hairline crack. But Agatha recognized this exact cup. She had seen its twin in Lydia's locked drawer. The cracked cup had been replaced. Good, Agatha thought. Instinct leads people true. "Go on," she urged. Doris set the cup on a tray and added a matching saucer. Her movements were tentative, tracing some half-remembered pattern of that day. The vicar's wife suddenly appeared at Doris's shoulder. "Oh, let me help you, dear." "No need," Agatha said sharply. The vicar's wife flinched back as if swatted. Meanwhile, Hodge sniffed around the urn, tail stiffening. He halted near a small brown bottle that someone had placed by the teapot. His fur rose. He hissed once, sharply, and backed away. Agatha's attention snapped to the bottle. Herbs. Bitter. Concentrated. The same scent she had inhaled from Lydia's tonics. Bill noticed it too. "That wasn't here a moment ago," he whispered. Agatha's pulse quickened. "Exactly." Mrs. Bloxby fussed with a vase of flowers. Neil Parker fiddled with his teaspoon. Mr. Jessup coughed loudly. The room felt thick with unspoken tension. Agatha stepped forward, tone casual but pointed. "Isn't it odd," she said conversationally, "how fragile some cups can be? One cracked rim and the whole thing becomes useless. Unless, of course, someone takes the trouble to hide the flaw, or to replace the cup altogether." The vicar's wife turned chalk white. Neil's teaspoon slipped from his fingers and clattered against the floor. A ripple moved through the hall, just a tremor, but enough. Enough for Agatha to study every face with a predator's patience. "Well," Agatha continued lightly, "we mustn't use faulty china today. Wouldn't want another tragedy." Silence expanded like a held breath. Under the trestle table, Hodge froze. His nose lifted toward one particular cup on the tea tray, the cup Doris had originally chosen. He sniffed once, twice, then abruptly darted backward with a sharp, distressed meow. Agatha's heart slammed in her chest. Someone had handled that cup. Recently. Someone had tainted or transferred something Hodge recognized. She scanned their faces again. Mrs. Bloxby, worried. The vicar's wife, pale, trembling. Mr. Jessup, nervous but hiding something else. Neil Parker, sweating, eyes darting. Doris, confused and frightened. Then Agatha saw it. A hand. One quiet, seemingly inconspicuous hand. Sliding, ever so subtly, a single cup farther back on the table. A tiny movement, but full of meaning. A gesture of hiding, concealing, removing something from casual reach. Agatha felt the room sharpen around her. Sound dulled, colours flattened. Only the movement mattered. She moved before she consciously decided to, crossing the room in 3 long strides. She reached the table and snatched the cup before the hand could withdraw completely. "Well now," she said brightly, loud enough for all to hear, "why would anyone want to move this cup?" Mr. Jessup blinked at her. I was just straightening the tablecloth." "Were you?" Agatha asked softly. He swallowed. She held the cup up to the light. No crack, no obvious flaw. But Hodge hissed from beneath the table, his entire body rigid. And that, Agatha knew, was no accident. "This cup," she said, turning to the audience now, "was not where it should have been. But someone who handled it before, recognizes it." She locked eyes with the vicar's wife, who looked as if she might faint. Neil Parker took a step back. Mrs. Bloxby's hand flew to her chest. But Mr. Jessup looked furious. Not frightened, not startled, furious. In that instant, Agatha understood. He had panicked. The smallest crack in composure was all she needed. A misplaced gesture, a defensive instinct, a tell. She set the cup down slowly, her gaze still locked on the landlord of the Red Lion. "Funny thing about cups," Agatha murmured. "They show who we are when we think no one is looking." The entire hall went still. Mr. Jessup opened his mouth as though to speak, then closed it again. But Agatha had seen enough. A tension, a flicker of dread, a defensive twitch that betrayed a man used to hiding things. She didn't have proof yet. She didn't have the full picture. But she had, at long last, found the hairline fracture in someone's confidence. A crack, not in porcelain, but in guilt. She stepped back, folding her arms. "Let's continue, shall we?" she said pleasantly. But the atmosphere had changed. People murmured nervously. Doris clutched Hodge, who continued to stare at the tea table as though it held a ghost. Bill Wong stepped closer to Agatha, whispering, "What did you see?" "Not what I saw," Agatha murmured. "What he showed." Bill followed her gaze to Mr. Jessup, whose hands now trembled around his teacup. Agatha allowed herself a slow, satisfied breath. Her trap had worked. The killer, or someone orbiting dangerously close to the truth, had just betrayed themselves. The vicarage sitting room had never looked more like a makeshift courtroom. Someone, Mrs. Bloxby, most likely, had attempted hospitality by laying out a tray of slightly stale biscuits and arranging the mismatched armchairs in a loose semicircle. But no amount of politeness could soften the air of quiet dread. Bill Wong stood near the fireplace, arms folded. Charles leaned against a bookcase, pretending nonchalance but gripping the edge just a bit too tightly. Neil Parker perched on the edge of his chair, jittery as a trapped sparrow. Doris, pale and limping, sat beside Mrs. Bloxby, who held her hand. Margaret, the vicar's wife, hovered near the doorway as though contemplating flight. Hodge had curled beneath a small side table, his eyes wide, ears twitching at every sound. Agatha took her place in the centre of the room. "Thank you for coming," she said, in a tone suggesting no one had been allowed to decline. "We are here to put the final pieces together." Bill cleared his throat. "Agatha will present her theory, then I'll determine what action is necessary." "Action is already necessary," Agatha muttered, though she forced a bright, brittle smile. "Now then, let's begin with what we know." She paced slowly before them, her heels clicking softly on the vicarage rug. Lydia Forbes died of a concentrated plant-based compound, similar to digitalis, found in her system. A compound present in the very tonics she sold all over the Cotswolds. The toxicology shows it entered her body during the WIT. She paused. But not through the teapot, not the milk jug, not the scone she barely touched. She let the silence stretch, watching faces tighten. The poison was found in the sugar residue at the bottom of Lydia's cup. Margaret's hands, clasped in front of her, shifted slightly. Agatha continued. "The cracked cup we all thought was the key. It wasn't. Lydia rejected it before tea was poured, and indeed forensics found no trace of poison on it. But a different cup, the one she ultimately used, was contaminated. Charles nodded subtly. He had heard this theory privately, but even he seemed unnerved by its unfolding in public. The poisoner, Agatha said, did not tamper with the pot or milk because Lydia was fussy. She liked her tea a certain way. She controlled how much milk was poured and only trusted herself to get the colour right. But there was one thing she always added herself. She let the weight of expectation build. Sugar. Doris gasped softly. 2 sugars, Agatha said. Always 2. A detail hardly anyone registered, except those who spent long enough in her presence. Neil swallowed hard. I hardly knew her habits. No, Agatha said, eyes trained on him. You didn't. And Alec Turner certainly didn't. Nor did Mr. Jessup or the pet shop owner, or most of the WI ladies. Her gaze shifted. But someone here did. Margaret's breath hitched. Some time ago, Agatha said, her voice turning quiet, Lydia stayed at the vicarage while consulting over your cat, didn't she, Margaret? Margaret's eyes darted toward Mrs. Bloxby, then the floor. Yes, she said faintly. And during that time, Agatha continued, she joked with you about her guilt over 2 sugars, saying God would forgive her indulgence. A thin whimper escaped Margaret's throat. Bill stepped forward, expression hardening. Mrs. Bloxby whispered, Oh, Margaret. Agatha pressed on. The poisoner didn't lace the pot. They laced the sugar, not any sugar, Lydia's sugar, the bowl placed nearest her cup, because they knew she would reach for it automatically, just as she always did. Margaret's knees seemed to buckle. She gripped the back of a chair for support. Agatha's voice softened, not out of sympathy but precision. You panicked when Lydia swapped cups because of the cracked rim. It disrupted your plan. You expected her to use the cup nearest the sugar bowl. When she changed her mind, you lost control. Margaret's lips trembled. I didn't. You did, Agatha said sharply. And afterwards, terrified the wrong clues might betray you, you broke into her cottage. You returned the cracked cup. You took a clean one. You even handled the tonics she kept in her drawer. Bill stepped closer. Is this true? Margaret's face crumpled. She left the drawer unlocked, she whispered. Agatha's eyes flashed. And Doris's accident, the gas hob, that wasn't an accident at all. Mrs. Bloxby gasped. Margaret's sobbing began like a tremor. I only wanted her to seem confused, she choked, to make everyone think she'd done it, to take attention away from me. I never meant, I wasn't trying to kill her. You turned on the gas, Agatha said bluntly. You nearly blew up half the lane. Margaret collapsed into the chair behind her, hands covering her face. Bill exhaled heavily. Margaret, you need to explain, all of it. Margaret wept harder. Lydia, she knew. She found my betting slips, my letters from the bank. She cornered me in my own kitchen. Told me the vicar would be ruined if people discovered why our savings had vanished. She said I needed her advice, and then she demanded money. How much? Bill asked quietly. 500 first, then 1,000. Margaret shook violently. I couldn't hide it anymore. I couldn't repay what I'd taken. She said she'd tell everyone, that she'd expose me at the WI meeting. Agatha murmured, So you silenced her. Margaret gave a broken nod. I thought, if she drank it, it would look like a heart attack. She was always so dramatic about her health, and with all her talk of remedies and herbs, no one would suspect. You calculated every detail, Agatha said. Except one. Margaret's red-rimmed eyes lifted. What? What detail? Agatha pointed gently to the table where Hodge crouched, watching Margaret with eerie stillness. You never planned for a witness with a nose sharper than any of ours. Margaret's gaze followed Agatha's finger. Hodge stared back, unblinking. It seemed to break something in her. Margaret folded inward, shoulders collapsing under the weight of the truth. I didn't mean for Doris to get hurt, she whispered. I only wanted her to doubt herself. Her calm, fussy confidence. It rattled me. I thought maybe she'd forget what she saw, if she believed she was forgetful. She sobbed again. I never wanted to harm anyone. Bill's voice was firm. But you did. Agatha stepped aside as Bill moved forward, solemn and controlled. Margaret Henshaw, he said, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Lydia Forbes and the attempted manslaughter of Doris Simpson. You do not have to say anything." Margaret's sobs drowned out the rest. Mrs. Bloxby bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Neil Parker stared at the wallpaper, face ghostly. Doris clutched Hodge, shaking uncontrollably. Agatha stood very still, hands clasped in front of her. This was justice. This was resolution. This was the moment she'd worked toward. So why did her heart feel hollow? Bill escorted Margaret to the door. The vicar, who had been summoned from his study, appeared just in time to see his wife led away. His anguished cry sent a shiver through the room. When the vicarage door finally closed behind them, silence settled, thick as dust. Doris reached out with trembling fingers. "Agatha, thank you." Agatha forced a smile. "We did what had to be done." Mrs. Bloxby wiped her eyes. "But at such a cost." Agatha looked down at Hodge, who pressed his head gently against Doris's hand. The little traitor, the little hero. She bent to stroke him. "Cats," she murmured, "notice far more than we ever give them credit for." But inside, Agatha felt the weary truth settle. Nothing about this case was neat. Nothing about justice felt triumphant. And no matter how cleanly she'd reconstructed the puzzle, a village heart had cracked wider than any teacup. Carsley recovered from murder with a speed that would alarm most outsiders, but locals considered it a point of pride. After all, they had endured scandals, affairs, petty theft, and multiple instances of dubious jam-making. Surely one felonious vicar's wife would not dent the village's serene denial that anything dreadful ever transpired there. Within days, Lydia Forbes's name drifted into a fog of embarrassed silence. People pursed their lips, murmured something about a tragic business, and promptly changed the subject to safer ground, such as Mrs. Mason's hedge, which had grown to what several neighbours insisted was a menacing height. At the WI, Doris Simpson was reinstated with all the pomp of a returning war hero, though delivered in the WI's usual brusque, faintly disapproving manner. "Well, we suppose you can resume kitchen duty," one lady sniffed, thrusting a tea towel at her. Another muttered, "It was all a misunderstanding. Terribly unfortunate, of course," while avoiding eye contact. Doris, ankle bandaged and cheeks pink, accepted the half-hearted apologies with dignified gratitude. She only flinched when someone joked about hiding the gas knobs from her, whereupon Agatha fixed the culprit with such a glacial stare that the woman fled to rearrange napkins in self-punishment. Agatha's own reputation, meanwhile, gleamed faintly brighter. Carsley was not generous with praise, compliments were rationed like wartime butter, but there were occasional comments. "Well, Mrs. Raisin does notice things. And she was rather clever about the cups. She does get results, you know." Agatha pretended not to hear any of it. She pretended far more strenuously than necessary. Bill Wong, ordinarily stingy with commendation, stopped by her cottage one afternoon under the pretence of returning a borrowed pen. "I'll say this once," he said gruffly, avoiding her eyes, "and only once. If you hadn't pointed out the sugar habit and the cups and that blasted cat, we might not have nailed it." Agatha blinked. "My goodness, that almost sounded like gratitude." "Don't push it," Bill muttered, fleeing before she could savour the moment. Roy Silver phoned from London the next morning, shrieking down the line, "Darling, how dare you solve a murder without letting me watch? I want every delicious detail. Start with the vicar's wife. Did she sob? Did she collapse dramatically? Did she fling herself at Bill?" "No," Agatha said, sipping coffee. "But you would have." Roy sighed dreamily. "I know." Even Charles offered to take her to dinner, promising to pay if she refrained from cross-examining the waiter. They went to a small French bistro in Mercester. Over cassoulet and a rather bold red wine, Charles clinked his glass against hers. "To the great detective of Carsley," he announced, "and to her remarkable ability to weaponize household crockery." Agatha sniffed. "Oh, do shut up." He leaned back amused. "Still jealous of Doris?" "I am not jealous of a cleaning lady." "Of course not," Charles said lightly. "You're only jealous of the cat that prefers her." Agatha set her fork down with great dignity. "I am jealous of no one, least of all that ridiculous creature." Charles smirked, unconvinced. The phrase "the cat that preferred Doris" continued to circulate in the village, but its tone had shifted. Now the remark came with affectionate teasing, a nudge of humour rather than a barb. Even Agatha begrudgingly tolerated it, mostly because no one dared say it to her face. A week after the drawing-room confrontation, Agatha hosted a small gathering at her cottage to celebrate the restoration of sanity, as she declared. Mrs. Bloxby brought lemon-curd tartlets. Charles arrived with a suspiciously expensive bottle of wine. Bill turned up with the vague air of a man wondering why he had agreed to come, and Doris, shy and limping slightly, carried a tin of shortbread she insisted was not very good, though it was devoured instantly. As the group chatted in the sitting room, Hodge performed his usual inspection of the guests. He sniffed Bill's shoes, ignored Charles entirely, rubbed once against Mrs. Bloxby's knee, then sauntered toward Agatha. Agatha smirked triumphantly, but at the last moment, Hodge changed course, sprang onto Doris's lap, curled up like a warm loaf, and began to purr with the blissful abandon of a creature unconcerned with diplomacy. The room erupted into laughter. "Oh, honestly," Agatha said, flinging up her hands, "he has no taste whatsoever." Charles nearly fell off the sofa. Bill actually smiled. Doris flushed with pleased embarrassment and stroked the cat gently. Agatha regarded them all with narrowed eyes, then muttered, "Traitor," at Hodge under her breath. But later, much later, after the guests had gone home, after Charles had kissed her cheek lightly in farewell, after Mrs. Bloxby had extracted one more promise from her to please rest for a few days, Agatha found herself alone in the quiet cottage. The evening ticked into night. Carsley settled, as it always did, into its comfortable hush. Curtains drawn, lamps dimmed, the faint scent of wood smoke from a neighbour's garden drifting through the crack of a window. Agatha washed the last teacup, dried her hands, and switched off the kitchen light. She went upstairs, grumbling to herself about stiff ankles that were not even her own. She had just slipped into bed when she heard the soft pad of paws in the hallway. Hodge appeared in the doorway. "Well?" she asked suspiciously. "What do you want now?" He trotted forward with purposeful determination, sprang onto the bed and sniffed the blanket. Apparently satisfied, he circled twice and settled himself directly against her arm. Agatha froze. "You are fickle," she informed him, "faithless, unreliable, a fur-coated opportunist." Hodge purred louder. "I mean it," she insisted, lifting her chin. "I don't care whom you prefer." He continued purring, stretching a paw to touch her wrist. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. Very gingerly, so gingerly it barely counted, Agatha raised her hand and stroked the soft fur along his spine. He arched into her touch, vibrating contentedly. She sighed, long and low. "Well," she said at last, "I suppose every detective deserves one loyal companion." Hodge yawned in agreement and nestled closer. Outside, Carsley slept beneath its quilt of night and secrets, temporarily, blissfully exhausted. No scheming vicars' wives, no toxic herbal tonics, no cracked teacups, just the soft hum of village life restoring itself. Inside, Agatha Raisin, who had saved Doris, outwitted a blackmailer and exposed a murderer, allowed herself one small private victory. Tonight, at least, the cat had chosen her. She did not move him away.